Okay, I think we could go.
Yeah,
I'm
yes.
eager.
I know. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Karen Tohana. I'm the Director of English Content at the Canada Media Fund, or CMF, where my role is to oversee most of our English language linear content programs. Um, I'm also here with my colleagues from the CMF, Emmanuel and Adela, who'll be helping us with any technical issues. And I'll send it over to my colleague, Carolyn, to introduce herself.
Thanks, Karen. So, yes, hi everyone. I'm Caroline Chopra. I'm a Deputy Director on the CMF Program Administrator team at Telefilm Canada. And for those who are not super familiar with the relationship between the CMF and Telefilm, Telefilm administers most of the CMF's programs, so the application process, contracting, payments. And so I'm very happy to be joining Karen today to go over some of the changes for 2026, 2027.
Yeah, so welcome everyone. We wanted to first start off with a land acknowledgement. While we meet today virtually, we acknowledge that we are all located in different places and are active across the country and in many Indigenous territories. We recognize Indigenous peoples as original custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather and work, live and create, and on which we listen to and watch the wonderful stories from our audiovisual industry. Next slide, please. So for today's agenda, we'd like to begin with some housekeeping items and then highlight some of the more significant changes to our linear content programs, followed by a question and answer period at the end. Just to let you know, there was a webcast last week specifically for interactive digital media changes by my colleague Janine Steele, and there was a morning session today for our linear content programs available in the French language. So next slide, please. Oh, sorry. Sorry, I'll just explain about the housekeeping. We will be recording this presentation and it will be made available online at a later date on CMF's YouTube channel. Card description is available if you wish to use this service. There is a link in the chat. Please note that chat is just for technical issues. And we will, like my colleagues will help out if you have any technical problems, just send a note in the chat. And please put questions in the Q&A when and we'll try to monitor throughout this presentation. And at the end, we'll try and group them according to themes and try and answer as many questions as possible. But please note that we have limited time with you today, unfortunately, but we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. But if we don't have time to answer them, we will send you an email later on, or please connect with us later as well. As this session is for general informational purposes, we ask that questions are for clarity of policy or questions about the guidelines. If you have a question that's specific to a project, please contact us later. Contact the CMFPA at Telefilm Canada or the Indigenous Screen Office if it's regarding an Indigenous program. And now I'll send over to Carolyn.
Oh,
Oops,
sure.
sorry. Oh, if you can just go back one slide,
No
sorry.
problem. It's okay. The presentation is for informational purposes only. So in the event that there's discrepancy between the presentation and the published guidelines, the CMF guidelines and business policies shall prevail. Next.
So this is a graphic of our budget for this year. I'm not going to go into detail of the entire breakdown, but I'll just highlight some changes that we made. So for this year, you'll see that the budget's approximately $362 million. And that's because we've combined the budgets from our IDM and linear content budgets of roughly $350 million and added $12 million for our industry from our industry pillar, which includes sector development. And we've moved our digital creators pilot program under the industry pillar this year and have also announcing that in audiovisual podcasters may be eligible now for digital creators. So we've tried to keep the budget at roughly the same as last year at $350 million. And this is to provide more stability and certainty to the industry. And in order to keep the budget at this level, we have strategically dipped into our reserves, and we are also using funds from the Government of Canada, which we were given over a 3-year period. So that's why the budget is kind of stabilized this year. And we've also devoted, there's a 36% increase to the IDM budget this year, but please note that the linear content program budgets basically remain the same. It's like status quo for the linear content program budgets, for all budgets. Next slide, please. So we wanted to talk about, while the industry is waiting for regulatory decisions and court decisions that will impact the sector, we feel it's important that the CMF continues to modernize our program model so that we're ready for more change and to address the oversubscription and increased demand, as the number of applications that the CMF receives is continuing to rise on a yearly basis. Next slide, please. So we wanted to talk about 3 of the more significant changes the CMF is making this year, which includes the announcement of our new distributor envelope program in production, which moves from a selective program to an automatic envelope model this year. And the reason behind this is that it provides more predictability and certainty to the industry, and it allows distributors to be another access point to unlock CMF funding to give applicants more choice beyond the traditional broadcast model. And part of the benefits for an envelope program is that funds are dispersed quicker because we're not waiting for selective decisions to be made. So eligible Canadian distributors with a track record of supporting CMF-funded projects have already been notified and will be receiving an envelope allocations commencing this year. We actually published a list of the eligible Canadian distributors with envelope allocations this year on our website under the envelope administration section, similarly to what we do for Canadian broadcasters. So if you're looking for who's received an envelope this year, you can find it on our website. So please do check that out because it's a useful tool. Next slide, please. So our second major change that we're making this year is production application must now have a minimum CMF envelope allocation from an eligible Canadian distributor or Canadian broadcaster. And that's in order to access any community-based program, which includes the Program for Black and Racialized Communities, the Anglophone Minority Incentive, the Francophone Minority Program, English Regional Production Bonus, and the Quebec French Regional Incentive, as well as accessing our genre-based program, the POV program. So the envelope allocation amounts vary by program, as well as when they are required, the timing of it. So for most of our first come, first served programs, the minimum envelope allocation is required at application. For our selective programs, like the Program for Black and Racialized Communities and the POV program, it's required at the envelope allocation is required at the time the CMF financing agreement is signed. Please note that this requirement of envelope allocation requirement does not apply to the Indigenous Production Program or to the Northern Production Incentive for this year. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the third change that we're making this year is the combining of CMF programs is now limited to 3 programs. So this is for projects in production. So this means, essentially what this means is that you can apply with 2 envelope programs, like the Broadcaster Envelope Production Program and the Distributor Envelope Program, the new Distributor Envelope Program, and only 1 community or genre-based program. So again, the limit of 3 CMF production programs that a project can access will not apply to the Indigenous Production Program. However, the cap of 3 programs will apply to the Northern Production Incentive. And again, this is also to deal with the demand of the request for CMF funding. It's, as I mentioned, it keeps continuing to increase. So this is a way to give projects more funding, but that means conversely that fewer projects may receive funding now. But that's part of the reason why we are we're initiating these changes for this year.
Thanks,
next
Karen.
slide, please.
Yeah,
Thanks, Carol.
Next slide. Okay. Oh, sorry, this slide. Yes. So also some changes for the supportive documentaries. The required threshold for documentary programming can now be met in part by eligible international entities, as long as their contribution towards threshold is 25% or less of the required threshold. And this added flexibility was offered to children and youth programming previously, and it now applies to documentary as well. In terms of genre flexibility, the CMF introduces this year flexibility offered to Indigenous applicants. So the CMF has expanded its definition of eligible programming to include reality and lifestyle programming as defined in Appendix A, provided that the content is related to Indigenous culture. And this applies to all CMF linear programs, not only to the Indigenous program. However, the applicant and the projects must be owned and controlled by Indigenous producers, and the projects have to be initiated by the Indigenous producers. Next slide. Other clarification and changes. So to demonstrate that the producer has control over all elements of the project, they're required to work and be able to communicate fluently in the original language of production of the project. And they will be discussing another language flexibility, which applies to the program for Black and racialized communities, just in a few slides to come.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Carolyn. So following extensive feedback from Indigenous and equity deserving producers, the CMF continues to evolve our approach to equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility. And as a result of this, the CMF is shifting most of our gender and diverse community policies centered on key personnel to focus on ownership and control of the project and applicant production company. And this is to align with numerous equity deserving industry stakeholders, and also to put more resources and power in the hands of companies led by individuals from underrepresented communities. So, so as a result, the CMF is moving from key personnel to ownership of the project and control of the project in our selective program. So points in our evaluation grid will now be awards to applicant companies and projects with the majority ownership of the control rests with these communities. And broadcasters and distributors will receive credit now for envelope factors based on the project ownership and control versus the key personnel. The CMF remains committed to monitoring representation across all our programs and continues to encourage participation in our persona ID, persona ID information, because it helps us see whether our funding is reaching communities. So it also supports industry benchmarking and fulfills our government reporting obligations and ongoing policy refinements at the CMF. So we usually take a look at the data we receive and see if there are gaps in our programs and whether we need to address more. There needs to be more change with what we're doing in our programs. Next slide, please. So now we'll look at some of the changes we're making to our specific programs, our linear content programs, starting with production, followed by pre-development and development. So once again, going to talk about the distributor envelope program, which shifted from a selective program to an envelope program. And just to note that this envelope program is also split like our broadcaster envelopes. There's a French envelope allocation for the distributor program, as well as an English envelope allocation. So letters were sent to eligible Canadian distributors that have received an envelope allocation this year. I'm not going to go into the envelope factors, the distributor envelope factors, because I'll mention later that there's going to be an information session later on for distributors, eligible Canadian distributors. So I'll just talk a little bit about the alternative access envelope. Eligible Canadians without a 2026-2027 CMF distributor envelope allocation may support a project in production by allocating funds from the distributor alternative access envelope, which is available to projects on a first come, first served basis, which opened basically on which was available as of April 14th until December 8th, our final closing deadline, or until these envelope funds are depleted, whichever comes first. Just to note that the English alternative access envelope allocation is 6.24 million. I just wanted to let everyone be aware that we've received a lot of applications for this funding, and the CMFPA, our team at Telefilm, will be verifying that these applications are eligible for the alternative access envelope, but the funds are close to being, like, there's still some funds left, but they're being close to being depleted. So please get in your applications as soon as possible if you wish to access the English alternative access envelope. And also, just for clarity purposes, the alternative access envelope it's not a program. It's not a CMF production program. It's just basically a pot of money that's available to eligible Canadian distributors who did not receive an envelope allocation this year. So when that pot of money is depleted, those funds are gone, unfortunately, for the year. So I just wanted to clarify that, because there's some questions we received on that issue. Sorry, just one more quick thing is that eligible Canadian distributors have to sign a DAF for the alternative access allocation. Thanks. Next slide. Yeah, so caps for related distributors. So we currently have existing caps on program budgets for in-house broadcasters and broadcaster affiliated applicants. And this cap will now include applicants who are related parties to distributors, to eligible Canadian distributors contributing to threshold, or essentially the eligible Canadian distributors who are unlocking CMF funding. And this information is indicated in the applicable program guidelines. And these caps only apply to the English Regional Production Bonus, the Francophone Minority Program, and the program for Black and racialized communities. And now
Speaking of the program for Black and racialized communities, in the next little while, I'll just go through some, again, high-level highlights of changes to specific programs. We'll start with the Black and racialized community program, which we often refer to as PBRC. So as mentioned earlier, all programs now have to include in production a envelope contribution. So for this program, the minimum requirement from a broadcaster and or distributor envelope is 1%. And it's required the earlier of the signing of the CMF production agreement, or December 8th, which is the date when the envelope program closes this year. There are some selective programs where an envelope contribution is one element of the selective process. So of course, if you're able to secure an envelope contribution for application, it would benefit your score, but it's not a requirement for eligibility. Also, regarding this program, I mentioned earlier some language flexibility. So as a pilot initiative, eligible projects can now be submitted in a language other than English or French. So for the PBRC global available funds, 1/3 will be strictly for French language projects, but the remaining 2/3 will be available for projects in English or any other language other than French. Provided that the entity that is contributing the envelope allocation to the project agrees to broadcast or make available the project to Canadians in that particular language. Next. So regarding the combining of funds, as Karen mentioned earlier, we're this year there's a limit of 3 programs. So the envelope, the broadcaster envelope, the distributor envelope, and 1 community or genre program. But just in terms of the language flexibility, that combination of funds can include the broadcast envelope program for diverse languages, and the 1% requirement can also be met by a broadcaster envelope program, diverse language. As long as that broadcaster language, the language that they acquire, matches the original language of production, and that it's a language other than English and French. Next. For the POV program, the minimum CMF broadcaster and distributor envelope allocation is 1%. And as I mentioned, for the PBRC, it's required the earlier of the signing of the CMF production financing agreement for December 8th. But again, if you can submit your application with an allocation from one or both types of envelope, it will likely benefit your score under market interest. All right, so for the ERPB, given that this is a first come first serve program, the broadcaster and or distributor envelope allocation is required at application. So the CMF's production first come first serve programs have to be fully financed, 100% financed at application, and this will include the minimum envelope allocation. The minimum allocation requirement is 4% or 75,000 from an English broadcaster or a distributor taking English rights, among others, I guess. And also just a change that the maximum number of applications starting this year is 1 application per closing date per eligible applicant. So we have a we have an opening date in May and another opening date in September. Regarding the Anglophone minority incentive, the minimum broadcaster and or distributor envelope required at application, again, because it's a first come first serve program, is the lesser of 2% or $10,000. And just another change that was made this year in the guidelines is that in addition to using English, sorry, the chat is going. In addition to using English as the original language of production for the majority of their projects, 51% of the company must be owned and controlled by individuals who identify as OLMC owners. This definition applies to the additional requirement definition of OLMC owners. And for producers who fall in this category, the reserve amount from the first closing date increased to 60%. Karen? You're on mute.
Sorry, I was just answering questions in the chat, grouping questions in the chat. So, this year, the CMF is introducing a new option to be used for first come first serve programs, which include the Anglophone Minority Incentive, the English Regional Production Bonus, the Francophone Minority Program, and Quebec French Regional Production Incentive. And so this is for situations where maybe this option may be used in situations where the proration is really poor or like dismal. For example, like in English Regional Production Bonus, where the demand continues to grow and outstrip funds, like where we've had prorations of ranging from 20 to 30%, which isn't really helping projects with their financing. So we have this mechanism that we will use, but will not be used for all programs unless it's absolutely necessary. And this is in the case of significant oversubscription for these first come, first serve programs on the opening date. And the CMF will introduce this additional option to manage demand. So what this means is that projects will be ranked according to the percentage of confirmed eligible market commitments, which is eligible distribution advances or eligible license fees, in proportion to the project's overall financing. And so the prorated amount we are announcing now is 65% for eligible requests. So this means that projects will be ranked according to the eligible market commitments, and projects with the highest rankings funds will be dispersed to these projects until the funds are dispersed. And also it's important to consider that any applicable program carve-outs and caps per genre, eligible applicants, language markets, regions, affiliated and related parties will continue to apply when we're scoring these projects. But again, this is not going to be used for all programs unless unless the proration is really severe and really significant. This is just kind of like a last option for us if we need to, like I said, if the proration is like 20, 30%, this is an option that we have to use so that projects get at least a satisfactory amount of funding instead of receiving 20%, which doesn't help any of the projects. So this means that fewer projects may get funded, but they'll receive a healthier amount of funds from the CMF. So now I'll talk about the Indigenous Production Program. So the Indigenous Screen Office, or ISO, has made some changes to the valuation grid. So we encourage you to familiarize yourself with these changes. It's a lot of clarifications to the scoring. So please to have a look at the valuation grid before applying for the Indigenous Production Program. And there's been another change to the Indigenous Production Program. So previously, the CMF contribution was the lesser of 60% of the project's eligible costs, or a maximum dollar amount by genre. The maximum dollar amount by genre has now been removed. So this year, eligible projects may receive the lesser of 60% of the project's eligible costs, or up to $750,000. However, eligible costs must be reasonable and verifiable, which the ISO will be taking a look at the budget more closely. Thanks. So in order to access other programs, CMF financing agreement for the 2026-2027 Indigenous Production Program must now be signed before applying for other CMF funding programs. And the rationale behind this is that the CMF now has two program administrators at the ISO and at Telefilm. So when there are projects that are accessing the Indigenous Production Program and another CMF program, like two other programs, then it was just causing like this administrative hurdle. So in order to disperse funds more quickly, we're going to ask that the Indigenous Production Program be signed first. They can go in, and then the applicant can increase the budget later on to apply for additional CMF funding. So that we thought would be the simplest way to ensure that applicants get their funding quicker, and that removes some of the hurdles that we experienced this year with having two administrators. So if the same production project is submitted for additional CMF funding without this signed agreement with the ISO and the applicant, this second application that would be administered by Telefilm will be withdrawn. So we just wanted to give you heads up on that, that is something that we're implementing this year. And again, for Indigenous development and pre-development, the evaluation grid has been changed. It's the same evaluation grid as in production. So please familiarize yourself before applying for pre-development and development program funding.
Thanks,
Next slide.
Karen. So some of you may have noticed that the core guideline documents are not posted this year, and that's because they were eliminated and the content was merged into mainly for production, the broadcaster and distributor envelope programs, because there's a requirement that to have an envelope allocation in each program. It was just a way to facilitate, your search for guidelines and requirements and policies. So the core guidelines are no longer a document published. And again, like all the information that was in the core guidelines is now in the envelope programs, except for development. So you'll find that the broadcaster envelope program that applies to development is now moved under development and pre-development guidelines. Next. For the English and French pre-development program, so that standalone pre-development program, because we've been receiving, again, over the years, an increasing number of applicants and applications, there's now a requirement for returning applicants. So if your company or corporate group has received pre-development financing in previous years from the English and French pre-development program, your company, your corporate group has to also have received CMF funding for one minimum of one production application in the last 7 years. So that is for fiscal years 2019, 2020 to 2025, 2026. And this does not apply to the pre-development funding offered under the Indigenous program or under the PBRC. In terms of SLATE development pilot program, there were some changes made, and we recommend that you review the SLATE development pilot program guidelines and contact my colleague Julie Veneris or myself at the CMFPA at Telefilm if you have any questions. But returning track record applicants and alternative access applicants, they can reapply for funding under certain and specific circumstances. And because each situation is a little different, we ask that you review the guidelines, and we're open to having discussions at a later time specific to your company. And also the number of projects that can be developed with a CMF advance from the SLATE development pilot program has increased from 3 to up to 5 eligible projects. Karen?
You're on
mute.
Thank you. Sorry. I'm very excited to announce the CMF will be launching a new business development program in fall 2026. As we've heard from our stakeholders during our fall consultations, as well as a survey that our analytics and strategic insights team sent out last fall, where there was overwhelming support for this type of program. And it's something that the federal government is also interested in this approach to provide funding for eligible companies to grow their businesses, expand into new markets, develop new business models and revenue streams, and create new business partnerships. So this program will be open to both linear and interactive digital media companies. There will be more details to be announced later this year. So please sign up for our newsletters. And the budget for this program will be $5 million, and it'll be split like per usual, 2/3 English and 1/3 French. Thank you. Next slide, please. So we just wanted to mention that there has been a change to our audit process. Sorry, there's been new sections added to our business policies for broadcasters and distributors in Appendix B to outline a new audit process for Canadian broadcasters and eligible Canadian distributors who now have these envelope allocations to unlock CMF funding. So I'm not going to go into detail here because it's fairly it's all in our Appendix B as well as in our envelope manuals. And this presentation is also geared towards towards applicants, not broadcasters and distributors. But please feel free to reach out to us after this presentation if you have any questions about this. But it's just to have an audit, to implement an audit process for Canadian broadcasters and Canadian distributors who are unlocking CMF funding. Because most of, in the past, it's been our audit has been geared towards our applicants, but it's something that we need to put in place but not just in the case we ever need to use it. So please reach out with any questions after this presentation. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I just wanted to mention that we have upcoming CMF webinar sessions. So my colleagues in industry development will be holding an English language session on Tuesday, May 12th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, followed by a French language session on Wednesday, May 13th, again at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. As I mentioned earlier, my colleague Suzanne Kepler, who manages the broadcaster and distributor envelopes, will be holding an information session for eligible Canadian distributors, which will be announced soon. If you have any questions or wish to sign or are interested in attending this session, please email that address below at envelopes@cmf-fm.c.ca, which we can also put in the chat for you. And that concludes our presentation. I noticed there's a number of questions in the chat, so we'll try to answer them right now. Please be patient because as I said, we try to group them. So if the same question is being asked, we'll try to answer them all at once. So let us give us a few minutes while we do this. Sorry, I will start.
I have a
you
question.
haven't? Go ahead.
Just so you could catch your breath, Karen.
Perfect.
I think it was regarding the 65% kind of target proration
the proration
level.
Right.
So the question from the producer is, do we put 15% of the request? Let's say the maximum request is 15%. Yes. Do they put 15% or 65% of the request?
No.
I think yeah, like there's a little misunderstanding. Every application should request the amount that the production financing structure requires, up to, of course, the maximum allowed in the program. It's just that when we do our eligible and complete assessment, and then we do the proration calculation, if the proration calculation shows a percentage of like 30%, as we have seen very, very low proration results in the past few years, we will then possibly take this new option of ranking projects per their market commitment in order for the proration to represent 65% of the requests. So please submit your complete and eligible application with the amount that the financing structure requires up to the maximum that the program allows. And we will only know in the days and weeks after we do our assessment of all the application received, if we will opt for this new method.
Yeah, thanks, Carol. Yeah, Carolyn, we won't know until we receive all the applications whether we need to implement this mechanism. Like, again, it's not something that we're going to do across the board for our first come first serve programs. It's just something if it's needed. If it's, like I said, if the proration would be 20-30%, it's something that we would need. So please, as Carolyn mentioned, please apply for up to the maximum amount that you need for the project, and then we will we will prorate it as required. But it is not necessary to put the prorated amount, the 65% in the financing. Thanks.
I have another question that relates to the selective process. So we have a question here about the PBRC and POV, although they're not technically first come, first serve. Does early submission help? The dialogue application forms for these programs open 2 weeks before the deadline, and you have 2 weeks to apply. So if you have commitments or you just want to have your application in early, please submit early within those 2 weeks, but it doesn't give any benefit to submit other than your peace of mind. We will wait till all the applications come on the final deadline and again assess for eligibility, and the eligible projects will go to the jury or content analysts and be assigned internally at the same time. So it's really up to you, and you have 2 weeks to apply to selective programs.
Sorry, there seems to be a lot of questions on PBRC, so I'll just answer this. To clarify, the PBRC no longer needs a broadcast commitment if we have a distributor contribution that meets the threshold. Yes, if you have an eligible distribution advance that meets the threshold, you can apply to PBRC with that, but you also need to meet the minimum envelope allocation of 1% of the project's eligible costs at the time of the CMF financing agreement is signed.
And just to clarify again that under the distributor envelope program, drama feature films are not an eligible genre or format. If you're going to apply for PBRC with a feature film drama, there needs to be a broadcaster contribution because the distributor envelope, if you only have a distributor envelope, the distributor envelope cannot be used on feature film projects.
Thanks. Sorry, I have another question.
Sorry, drama feature films, not dogs.
Right. Thanks. So there's a question about ERPB. Can you clarify what the 4% or 75,000 refers to? So yeah, that's the minimum envelope allocation from either a Canadian broadcaster or eligible Canadian distributor required at application for the English region production bonus is now the lesser of 4% of the project's eligible costs, or $75,000. So sorry, I'm just gonna.
That's for ERPB.
Yeah, ERPB. Okay, sorry.
There's a question about where to find the envelope allocation. So both the broadcaster envelope allocation and the distributor envelope allocation for this year can be found under envelope administration. So at the bottom of every single CMF FMC CMF-fmc.ca webpage, there's a black box and with links, and so under program information you can see envelope administration, and if you click on that you'll be able to retrieve the 2026-2027 broadcaster envelope holders as well as the distributor envelope holders.
So sorry, there's a question about where's a list of eligible distributors who did not receive a distributor envelope. No, that is something we're only going to publish. We only published the list of eligible distributors that did receive an envelope for this year. We will not be publishing a list for distributors who did not receive a distributor envelope. Sorry.
There's a question about if the broadcaster envelope and the distributor envelope can be combined to satisfy that minimum allocation, and it's yes. So those are two of the three programs that can be combined. So absolutely, you can have a broadcaster envelope allocation and a distributor envelope allocation to meet the minimum and to meet threshold as applicable.
Yes. Sorry, I'm just going to see. Sorry. Yeah, there's a question about ERPB again, another one. For ERPB, would recent years of oversubscription meet the deadline of definition, sorry, meet the definition of severe oversubscription? Yeah, it's most likely because it was ERPB proration was like 30%, 20, like so that like if the proration after the opening days at 30%, yes, we will probably implement that new mechanism to keep the proration amount at 60, to have the proration amount at 65%, the 65% level. Sorry, just trying to get a sense of yeah, so that would be a measure where we may implement the ERPB. Like again, we would look at our options. We also have the maximum the cap on ERPB applicants this year is 1 per deadline. So that's another way we're managing over subscriptions. So we will look at everything on the day of the opening deadline and determine whether we will implement it. But yeah, like a 20% proration, we may use that new mechanism option. Sorry, I just have to click done.
Seems like there's questions that they kind of repeated and we've answered. So we're just trying to see that questions.
Okay. So this question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say there's a question about eligibility requirements for the fall business development funding. We will publish them as it probably won't be later, but once we do, it'll probably be posted in our newsletter. So please sign up for a newsletter for any details about the new business development program. Sorry, Caroline.
There was a question about how gender and diversity at the ownership level, I'm sorry, at the ownership level are evaluated, and if it's just the applicant and its structure or its parent and the corporate group. So yes, we look at the applicant company and its parents to ensure that the gender parity definition and diversity definition are met at the ownership level. And it's ownership and control. So often we see that the 51% of shares has been met and satisfied. However, at the board of director, control is not necessarily in the hands of the communities or the people that should have control. So don't forget to look at how your board of director is also structured.
Sorry, there's a question about can you clarify if a distributor MG for Canada can be used to meet threshold? If it's an eligible distribution in advance, yeah, from an eligible Canadian distributor, it can be used to meet threshold. Yeah.
However, that eligible distribution advance has to be for the Canadian rights of broadcast and or online distribution. The eligible distribution advance cannot be for theatrical or airlines or any other rights in Canada other than broadcast and online distribution. If your distributor also wants to take those other rights, they would just pay an additional advance for those other rights. But the one that to count towards threshold must be for Canadian broadcast or online distribution. And that's all explained in the guidelines.
Oh, there's a question about interactive digital media. So yeah, there's a question. What was the rationale for excluding feature films in the drama programming genre from the distributor envelope? This isn't a new rule. This was like a rule we've had from the beginning of the distributor program when it was a selective fund as well. Um, Also, one of our requirements at the CMF is that the theatrical the feature film version has to be broadcast um, on television or on a broadcaster streaming platform. Correct me if I'm wrong, Carolyn. Um, so also we also want to respect that our sister organization Telefilm is more of the feature film funder in Canada. The CMF funds all other audiovisual content primarily for from linear television because of our traditional broadcast model and interactive digital media. So we want to just we are respecting our sister organizations lane in that they are the feature film funder of Canada and we fund other audiovisual content. We do fund feature films in our other programs, so please note that.
Exactly. In all
And
other
there
programs other than the
exactly,
distributor
yeah,
envelope.
there may be some caps on feature films, but we do fund them in our other programs just for the distributor program at this time. But this has been the rule since its inception, since we had the distributor selected program. So, sorry, answer.
There's a question about why the distributor envelope for alternative access was open um, on April 14th, I guess, and not set up like a first come, first serve program, for instance, the Anglophone Minority Incentive or the English Regional Production Bonus. And that's because it's really an envelope that is included in the distributor envelope program. And its sister program, which is the broadcaster envelope program. So it's not its own program, it's
Yeah,
the
it's not a
envelope
separate
program.
funding program. It's not a separate funding. Like I said, it's like a bucket full of money, like envelope money that distributors, eligible Canadian distributors can access. Like it's not
Mhm.
a program that's for distributors. It's just
And
another
the
way to fund.
envelope programs are the only programs that are open for like 8, 9 months from April to December. And the idea behind that is that the application should trickle in. But of course, if we receive a lot of applications in the spring from eligible Canadian distributors, the envelope may be spent. But it's not its own program. It's linked to the other envelope program.
Um, Sorry, there's a question. Were the changes to these programs made in consultation with broadcaster distributors, producers, and market realities? Yes. The CMF holds annual industry consultations in the fall each year. So we did meet with all our stakeholders and to go over these proposed changes. And we also sought written feedback. They also gave comments during these consultations, as well as we were welcome to for these groups to send written submissions, which we evaluated all the written submissions to help inform, which helps inform our policy and programs going forward. So we definitely do consult with our industry stakeholders, and that's something that we do every year. Um,
Emmanuel, would it be possible to go back one um, slide to slide 30, just so that our participants can write down the envelope dash envelope at fmc dash fmc dot sorry, cmf
okay,
dot
got it.
fmc dot ca address. There was some questions about that.
Right. Um, um, there's a question about what about the Northern incentive? Can you unpack the eligibility or should I send my request by email? Okay, so Northern for the Northern production incentive, um, yeah, so I guess they're asking about the new changes that we made, and we said that some of the changes, the three main changes weren't applicable. So the the minimum envelope allocation for Northern production incentive does not apply. You do not need a minimum envelope allocation at at all for this program. But the maximum cap of three programs, CMF programs, does apply to the Northern Production Incentive. So you could apply
To the
to
two envelope
envelope
program
for,
plus
yeah,
Northern.
broadcaster and distributor. Yeah. Those are the only ones. Sorry.
And the Northern incentive for production and development is reserved for applicants and shareholder producers who reside in Yukon, Northwest Territory, and Nunavut. So that is the three regions. There's a question about, and I think I saw a few threshold questions about the distinction between threshold and the minimum envelope allocation, and they are really two notions. Threshold is the minimum market contribution from either an eligible Canadian broadcaster and or an eligible distributor, Canadian distributor. To meet threshold is like the minimum that the market has to pay, I guess, in either eligible license fee or eligible distribution advances to unlock CMF funds from any program. So the guidelines have the programs, the types of programming, the series versus one-offs. The threshold varies per program and per format. That is separate from the minimum envelope contribution that is required. The minimum envelope contribution that's required is CMF envelope program allocation. So it's two different notions. And this year, you need to meet threshold and have an allocation from a CMF envelope or more than one.
Great.
I hope that clarifies.
So
we're just
nearing,
three minutes
just nearing.
away. Did you want to share maybe the last slide with other email address?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thanks. Yeah, so if you still have questions, please feel free to contact our CMF program administrators at Telethon Canada. For all other CMF programs, excluding our Indigenous programs, which you can contact the Indigenous Screen Office, and we can put those emails in the chat, I think. Okay, well, yeah. No, thank you. And feel free to feel free to reach out if you have any other questions. Unfortunately, we didn't, there were a lot of questions today. So thank you. And thank you for, there's been also a lot of questions on the distributor program. So we appreciate that. We appreciate all the support. And reach out if you have any questions at those email addresses below. And just wanted to say thank you, everyone, for spending your time so we can highlight some of the changes that we were making this year to continue to modernize the CMF's program model. Thanks, Emmanuel. Thanks for sending those. Yeah, so the email addresses are in the chat. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.